Hi guys, it's Lisa here. I hope you're well. I just wanted to film a bit of a mini series, just highlighting some of the basics of cross stitching, some of the things that I've picked up along the way that I want to share with you that I hope that you'll find useful, especially if you're a beginner. So the first thing I want to share with you is how to start, and from that I mean how to actually start the process of making your first stitch, you know, what to do with the ends of your threads as you do this. So there's two ways that I always use more often than not, and I will show you a third way through this. So the first way I'm going to show you is the loop method. So I've got my thread just here, and what I'm going to do is thread my needle. So basically I've joined the two ends of the thread together. Just get those nice and even. So I've actually got like a little loop on the end. So I'm going to go ahead and thread my needle. So for those of you who don't know, these are needle minders, and they're just basically like little things that you can hold your needle on. They're magnetic and basically stop you from losing your needle as you're working. You can get many different types. I love them. And obviously you can theme them to the projects that you're working on. So I've threaded my needle, so I've got, it will look something like that with the loop at the end. So on my hoop I've got some, it's just 14 count Ada this. So I'm going to zoom you in a little bit closer and I'll show you first the loop method. So to stitch the loop method, you're going to start, so if this is a square that you're working on, my first leg of my stitch comes that way, and then my second leg of the stitch will come across this way. So I always go down the top right hand corner, leave your loop as such, and then you're going to come up the bottom left hand corner. And then as you pull the thread through, you'll thread your needle through the loop that you've created and then just pull tight. And then I just go back through that top right hand corner stitch, and then all that pulls around the back. And then I'll come up and then complete the stitch like so, and then continue in that manner. Everything's nice and snug. I'll show you the back of the work in a moment. I'll just flip this over, I'll put one more stitch in, and then I'll flip it over and show you the back of the work. So that's how the back will look. So it's all very neat, all very tidy. Now this method is perfect if you're stitching with two strands of thread. But sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes you'll just work with one strand of thread, and obviously the loop method, you can't start it in that way. So I'm going to show you another method right now called the Lasso Method. So when I'm using the Lasso method, I always start in the bottom left hand corner. So as I was saying earlier, I always do the bottom legs of my stitches in that direction, and then the top leg across from bottom right to top left. So I've threaded through, so this is going to be like the bottom edge of the stitch. So I've brought the needle through and I'm keeping hold of the tail at the end. And then I'm going to pass the needle through the top of the stitch. And then I'm going to bring the needle back through the bottom, and all the while I've got hold of the thread behind the piece of work. Now once I've got this through here, I'm now going to flip over the hoop and show you what's going on at the back. This is how you capture the thread. So the hoop is now flipped over. This is the floss end I was holding on to. You don't have to leave it as long as this. We will cut this off, but you can obviously make this much shorter. But this is just for demonstration purposes that I'm showing you. So this is the loop that we're going to capture the end under. So all I'm going to do is just maneuver my thread through and then just pull that top stitch. So pull the one with the needle. Now that is now secure. You can cut that a little bit shorter. I wouldn't necessarily leave it as long as that. As I said, this is just for demonstration purposes. But now I'm going to flip back over to the front of the work and continue cross stitching. So we're now back on the top side of the work and everything is nice and snug, so I can pull quite sharply on that stitch, and then all I need to do is just continue cross stitching. You can leave that tail a little bit longer on the back because eventually you'll stitch over the top of it, so that's not a problem. I don't like to do that, so what I'll do is just go back and just trim that a little bit shorter. So I'll now flip over to the back of the work again and you can see how that's starting to look. So this is now the back side of the work again. So you can see your tail end hanging there, and there's my needle end, and then I'll just continue to cross stitch in that manner. So that is the lasso method. The third method that I'm going to share with you is what we call the waist knot method. This isn't something I tend to use as a rule, but I do know that many stitchers find this really a useful method. And like the loop method, this stops you having to flip over to the back of the work, so you can start from the front of the work basically, and you're not having to maneuver the loop like you do with the lasso method, because you need to check what's going on in the back as you pull that starting thread through the loop at the back. So this is just another way of being able to minimize the amount of movement effort from your loop. So I'll show you basically what the waist knot method looks like. So I'm just going to tie a couple of overhand knots in my thread, and I'm going to do more than one because I'm using quite a low count aider, which means that the holes are larger, and therefore I will need a decent sized knot to stop it pulling back through. So I've now got my knot on the end, and what the waist knot method allows you to do is just start a little bit away from your work. So I want to start stitching somewhere around here, so I'm going to place my waist knot just here out of the way of where I will be stitching. So I'm just going to pull that through, and then the knot will stop the rest of the thread from pulling through, and then I'm going to start to stitch somewhere around about here and start to put my crosses in. And then what you will find is you actually start to stitch over the line of thread that's actually at the back here. So I'm going to continue to put some more crosses in. And now that I've got a few crosses in, I'm just going to flip it over and show you the back of the work. This is the point where the waist knot's sitting on the other side of here, and this is where I've started to stitch, and you can see that I've actually already stitched over this strand of thread, which is great because that has now secured the tail end, which is ideally what you'd want to do. So I'm just going to flip this over and I'll show you how to remove the knot. So when you're finished, all you'll need to do is just pull this strand of thread towards you, and it raises the knot, and you'll be able to get your embroidery scissors underneath to cut it free. And then you can just tie off any excess on the back that you may have. But this is another great way to start if you're just working with one strand of thread. So to finish your work, there are so many different ways that you can actually do this. I've known stitchers finish the section that they're working on, and then so they don't have to flip over their work, they will just bring the thread up at some given point within the piece that they're stitching, and just literally pull that through and leave it, join on another piece of thread, and then work. And as you work, you can leave this loose at the front, and then you'll naturally stitch in behind it. So if you don't want to have to flip over the work, that's a great way to finish from the front. But I'm going to show you how I just tie everything off the back. I always do it this way because then I know my stitches are secure and nothing's going to come away, although I'm sure it won't by doing that method either. So I'm just going to flip over the piece and I'll show you how I personally do it. So this is the back side of the work, and all I do to finish off my threads is just literally stitch and pass the thread underneath 2 or 3 stitches like so. Slide the needle through and then just pull the end of that thread underneath, and then I'll just trim off any excess on the edge. But that really is a very simple way. It's literally stitched underneath and will not go anywhere. I hope you found that useful. I'll catch you soon. Take care. Bye.